everyone. Welcome back. Today, I'm really excited to have Carlos Tanner with us. Hi, Carlos. Thanks for being here.
Oh, thanks so much for having me on.
So good to finally connect with you and hear all about your path. If people don't know who you are, so Carlos has been studying the science of ayahuasca and plant medicine in the Amazon rainforest since 2003. He currently works as the director of the Ayahuasca Foundation, a nonprofit organization he began in 2009 in Quito, Peru. He organizes healing retreats and educational courses led by indigenous healers called curanderos to help people in need of healing anything from depression to cancer or who are interested in learning the ancestral healing traditions of the Amazon. Since 2017, the Ayahuasca Foundation has also hosted plant medicine research looking into the effects of treatment with ayahuasca on depression, anxiety, and trauma. In 2021, that research was published in the journal Frontiers in Psychiatry, demonstrating that attending an ayahuasca retreat can produce epigenetic changes that significantly reduce depression and anxiety. Research continues at the center and will now include studying chronic pain, PTSD, and changes to the gut biome as a result of attending an ayahuasca retreat. And you can check out his links right here in the show notes at the ayahuascafoundation.org. Carlos, I would love to hear your whole story. Carlos and I have been chatting off camera before this interview that we both have some undergrad college interconnections, and we're trying to make this connection of like, wow, we might have met each other. But of course, we were, that was a while ago, and we were probably both doing a lot of drugs back then. But Carlos, I want to hear your story. You know, you went to college. How did you end up making ayahuasca your essential career? Like, were you doing something else before this? What was your path?
Yeah, I was doing something else. I at UMass, where we both attended school for a while. I did graduate from UMass in '97, and I had degrees in art and philosophy. Graphic design was my field. And so I started working for the University of Massachusetts, helping them with their website while I was a student. And then I worked for the Valley Advocate, which you probably read while you were there, which was the alternative news weekly in that region, and worked on their website, but really worked in print graphics. And it was during that time that I also, I guess, hit the pinnacle of Western conditioning success, but yet also started spiraling downward into drug addiction because that success wasn't fulfilling at all. And I was so conditioned to believe that it was success that I accepted that it was so unfulfilling that I started doing drugs and drinking a lot more as a way to cope with the success, I guess, to cope with the lack of satisfaction that came with it. Prior to that, I drove a VW bus. I was a super hippie. I traveled around following the band Fish, the Grateful Dead. I drove cross country 6 times, and I love that that spirit where I could just follow this path of omens, I guess, where I might stop and stay in a place and work for a little while and then move on and, just really kind of live a nomadic life. And having a career job stopped me from doing that. And then I felt my life become much more stagnant, but yet I was conditioned to think that's what you needed to do. You have to settle down. And that's what that meant. And so that led me to eventually have an opiate addiction, which culminated in me waking up in my car underwater because I had blacked out behind the wheel because I was drinking and taking drugs, and drove off the road into a river. And that was a really important night. I survived, thankfully, but I knew that I might not survive the next time. And so I made a declaration that I would do something drastic to save my life. And then a week later, I randomly got an email saying from a friend saying that she was in Iquitos, Peru. She had met 2 guys that knew a shaman named Don Juan, and she was going to drink ayahuasca with them and wanted to know if I wanted to fly down to Peru and drink ayahuasca with her and Don Juan. And I thought, this isn't a coincidence. So I accepted her invitation, knowing that this was a sign from God, really. The universe was responding to my declaration to do something drastic. Here was the invitation, essentially, to do it. So when I got on the plane in 2003, I knew that this would be a life-changing experience for me, which it was. And it wasn't just that I was healed, which was an amazing process, to see that I wasn't actually needing to heal my addiction. I needed to heal the root causes of the addiction, which were childhood traumas, and that I didn't even know I had, so it was just like fascinating and so amazing to go through the process and learn so much about, life, I guess, just what it means to be healed or to be ill. But during that time, the curandero also invited me to be his student. He told me it was my path to be a healer and invited me to be a student. I was having very, very similar experiences as well. So it was like confirming something that I felt. But here was like now another much more profound invitation to move to the Amazon rainforest and live with this shaman and study with him. So I accepted his invitation. And then in January of 2004, I moved to Iquitos, Peru, into his house and lived with him and his 20-member family and started studying with him. And so I lived with him until 2008, and I studied with him for a little over 4 years. At the end of that, I came up with the idea for the Ayahuasca Foundation, which we then founded in 2009. And yeah, I mean, everything has been this continuous series of synchronistic invitations, you could say, or connections and things of that nature that have continued to unfold for me even to this day, that allowed me to become the director of this amazing organization, to team up with this research team, to speak to you. Like, all of these things just have been a really magical set of circumstances and connections that continue to build on this path that I'm on.
Oh my God, what an amazing story. Thank you so much for sharing. I'm like, wow, that is incredible, especially back then. It's always been interesting to me that, probably a lot like you, especially since we compared some stories, that I started on this path at a very young age, at the age of 14, like my first psychedelic experience. And then it just kind of became part of life. And I didn't think anything of it until, very much like you, it became kind of other drugs and alcohol became a problem later on, until I started discovering this other way and this other path, and really waking up to like, oh, this probably isn't the best for me to be drinking a bottle of wine every night. But I want to hear a little bit more about that initial experience. When you first went down there, I'm curious, did you just dive in and do like a whole dieta, or did you stay for a few weeks? And then did that initial first experience just say, did it say to you like, this is it, this is your path? Like, was it, or did it happen over, some time?
Right. I would say that I dove in, but at the same time, I don't think very many people knew the term dieta back then, and even now, I think that term is very complicated for people to try to understand it. So I definitely wouldn't say that I did a dieta. Well, I didn't do a dieta by my definition. No one told me that there was any restrictions at all anyway. So I mean, I was doing drugs like straight up till I went to my first ceremony. There was I wasn't going to a retreat center. So there was no communication about like preparation or anything like that. I just kind of showed up and went to this guy's house, which wasn't really a house. It was kind of like a shack at the end of this dirt road, which was the curandero Don Juan Tangoa's house. And, I drank ayahuasca with him, as well as a bunch of local people that were there, which was meaningful for me because this, I guess I was skeptical that maybe I was going to have some show put on for tourists or something, but that clearly wasn't happening. There were people there that were not tourists at all, most people, other than my friend and the two people that had introduced us to Don Juan, who were living there too. They weren't tourists, but but I did 5 ceremonies in 3 weeks, and or 2.5 weeks, and yeah, I mean, I just the first ceremony, from the first ceremony to the third ceremony, there was just such a massive transformation. So my first ceremony was hell. Like I said, I was using opiates like up until the day before, maybe even that morning. I don't remember, I was smoking weed. Like there was no preparation. So that first ceremony was rough. Like I threw up like 15 times. I was like shit my pants. It was terrible, but I had crazy visions, but they were all nightmares, but they were still like fascinating, even though they were nightmares. I was like, how is this so real? Like someone came and I gave him my wallet and he took it. And then the next thing I know, I was like, oh my God, I think I just gave my wallet to that guy. And I'm like, what guy, man? That wasn't a guy. Like, like it was so confusing, but also fascinating about how it could be so real. And then I processed that. After that ceremony, I wasn't sure if I would do it again, but eventually like worked it out in my mind, like that it was me and not the ayahuasca. It was like my shit that was making the experience so bad. So I went back with a better mindset, especially with regard to fear. Like I wasn't going to be afraid. I was just going to like do it. And the second ceremony was massively different. Like everything that was some nightmarish demon was now some like heavenly angel, like the same thing. And so that experience was huge in teaching me how much our own mindset, our own interpretations, our own responses really determine what we perceive to be the reality of our experience. And that was a massive lesson, like right from the beginning. And then from that to the third ceremony. So the second ceremony became this concretization of the reality, or my belief in the reality of spirit, because I had a spirit come to me and touch my shoulder, and I felt it, and I had my eyes open, saw him, and he was looking at me, and I communicated with him. And my friend called to me at that moment to say that she could see him, this spirit. And I was like, oh my God, like, this is real, this is so real. So when I went into that third ceremony, I wasn't afraid. I had true faith, or knowing that spirits were real. And that like essentially created the foundation for what would then become this massive decision to devote my life to this, because it was the third ceremony when Don Juan told me, this is your path. And I was just like, yeah, this is what I want to do. Like, this is it. Like I figured it out, or I found what I want to follow. And so just in that week, a lot happened.
The story is incredible. I love hearing these stories because it's shaped, this medicine in particular, ayahuasca, has shaped so much of my path. And like a lot of people, I always say I probably would have been dead by now on some level, if it wasn't for this medicine, or who knows, or something close to dead. So, but let's get into this a little bit more. Over the years, you've seen a lot of people come down there, and obviously there's been an increase in interest and people going down there for big experiences. And, you mentioned in your bio that the foundation's been doing research around, the effects of this medicine, which I've noticed over the years it has been studied, but it's definitely less studied than, the ketamine or the MDMA that they're pushing through the US government right now. But people do have these profound healings, like all of us that are on this path, I would say at least know one or two people who've had very similar stories. Maybe it wasn't as deep as yours, being told that you're a healer and devote your life. But I've personally had these miracle healings. What have you seen over the years that people are going there for? Like, what is the human condition over, especially in the last, let's say 5 years or 8 years, like what is going on in the world that is bringing people to seek, to go down to a place like Iquitos and sit in maybe a not so comfortable place, like going out into the jungle or sitting in an open air maloca. But what's going on that's bringing people to ayahuasca, and what have you noticed in the patterns and the shifts over the years?
Well, to answer the first part of that question, what's bringing people, I would say it's a cumulative effect of those stories. So more and more stories. In fact, just this month, Aaron Rodgers, the quarterback for the Green Bay Packers, gave an interview to Aubrey Marcus where he told him that it was his ayahuasca experiences and the profound nature of the healing he experienced in ayahuasca ceremonies that he attributed to winning the NFL MVP. So when you have a story like that, which was then picked up by like 50 sports news channels, that intrigues a lot of people. And I keep analytics, of course, of my own website. And there was this, like, it almost doubled the amount of people that started searching for ayahuasca on Google immediately after that Aaron Rodgers interview. But Will Smith just wrote a book where he talks about his ayahuasca experiences. He's been open about it. And so more and more people are starting to kind of come out of the psychedelic closet, if you call it that, and talk about their experiences. But specifically with ayahuasca, maybe, this is a general statement, of course, but like maybe the most profound experiences are the ones that involve ayahuasca over the ketamine stories or the MDMA stories or even the LSD or peyote stories. And so for that reason, I think, there's a greater and greater awareness of what ayahuasca is. And then also coupled with that is this greater and greater idea that ayahuasca can produce a profound transformational experience. And so, almost in a similar way that, that clinical trials in antidepressant medications increase their effectiveness each year, like Prozac becomes more and more effective each year because people know that it is effective, or at least believe that it is effective. I think that's a reality, that if you believe something is effective, then your belief in its effectiveness contributes to the actual result of what it does. I mean, we call that the placebo effect, but maybe there's a better name for it, where our consciousness becomes an active participant in the healing process. And that's certainly true with ayahuasca. But I think maybe more so than any of the other psychedelics, ayahuasca has this very, very intact and rich tradition of use, which could be considered a science of consciousness enhancement. So they've really figured out over the hundreds of perhaps thousands of years of developing these traditions that there is a way to optimize the ability for our consciousness to participate in the process. And by doing so, we obviously maximize the potential outcome of the experience, such that a person can have this life-changing, profound transformation the way that I did, or that you did, or that so many people report, or maybe become MVP in the NFL. And so for that reason, I think a lot more people are looking at it. But what they're trying to heal is a problem that is essentially the result of a paradigm that's lacking in its accuracy, I'll call it, where we have a scientific paradigm that essentially dictates what we consider to be truth in our culture, but yet it doesn't acknowledge spirit. And so we're left with this kind of hole where consumerism has done this beautiful job of taking advantage of that, almost to the conspiratorial point where maybe they don't want you to know that your spirit is the true path to fulfillment. Instead, try to buy your way to fulfillment, to fill up that emptiness through purchasing. And now we're at a point where people are like, hey, you know what? We've seen it play out, and that's not the path. And now there's an awareness that there's indigenous traditions and indigenous perspectives and indigenous paradigms that are our own ancestral paradigms that may be the key to actually realizing that fulfillment. And that is essentially what could heal me of this depression, or heal me of this emptiness, or heal me of this loneliness, or this lack of attachment or connection. And so that to me is what people are really trying to find, is that fulfillment that reconnects them with the world that they want to be a part of.
Yeah, that's thank you for sharing that, because I mean this comes up in nearly every excuse me, nearly every conversation I have on this podcast. It all comes back to this, disconnection from source and disconnection from earth and self. And there's this constant need, like you mentioned, like to find something external, like especially here in the Western world, the external, looking outward, outward, outward. But really it's like, let's go inward and do this inner work and find that we don't need, I mean, this is kind of big to say, we don't need any of that, that really it is about this deeper level connection that is the only thing in the end that truly will fulfill you. But, speaking of fulfillment, because this is a huge part of the work that I do and the path that I'm on, what I started witnessing, especially as I walked onto the medicine path deeply, is that so many people would come to the medicine, have these big experiences, and go back to life and go back to the same old, same old. And, the root cause of a lot of their unhappiness was the work they were doing. It was like the daily grind of being in a job, and kind of like, your original story of what you were doing. It was like the unfulfillment and turning to something external to numb it, to make, maybe this will make my job better, because Monday through Friday I'm miserable. And so then I just get drunk on the weekends, or I go shopping on the weekends, or I spend money. Do you find that a lot of people who go down there and have big experiences working with ayahuasca, do you find that there's this other part of their fulfillment problem that is connected to the work they do, or connected to the system of having to make money and having to make a certain amount of money in order to live a certain lifestyle, especially here in America? Like, and do you see people that wake up and say, you know what, I don't want to be in this corporate career anymore. I want to be an artist like I originally planned, or I want to give back and serve. Like, have you seen this pattern, or is that just something I've noticed over the years?
No, definitely. I mean, ayahuasca is definitely contributing to the unemployment rate, in the sense that people definitely leave their jobs. They realize that they are not doing what would be most fulfilling for them, and they come to see themselves as they truly are. They come to remember the vision that they had before they let the world like modify that, before they decided that they needed to squeeze themselves into a box that didn't fit them, that wasn't shaped for them, but yet was the box that was intended for people for whatever reason. And so, when you come back to your natural shape again, then you don't want to squeeze yourself back into that box again. You want to like do something where you don't have to do any squeezing, and so I think that's very, very natural for people to do that. At the same time, I look at the healing process as a paradigm shift. And so we grow up in a culture, just as I was conditioned to believe, of what success meant, and what that looked like, and what I thought that would feel like. I was blessed to be able to move to the Amazon and have my paradigm shift come through immersion. But for a lot of people, you can have that first step forward, I'll call it, where you recognize that that's one paradigm and that there is another. And that's a huge step forward, because a lot of people think that the one paradigm is the truth. It's reality. It is. There's no other reality. There's just one reality, and that's it. So just the experience that a psychedelic experience can provide, where you're like, you know what? That's not the only reality. There is another reality. And that is a massive step forward. That I think a lot of people would call that like an awakening. But that doesn't mean that like, well, you have that experience and then the next day you live in that world. Not that takes a lot more time. And And so that's where the integration process comes into play. But if you are like going somewhere to have that awakening experience or to have that profound realization, and then you just go back home, so to speak, back to the old environment, then yeah, like that, there's going to be a lot of challenges, and that process might take years and years to come to a place where you do find yourself living the life that you want to be living. And so to be clear, like the psychedelic experience can massively like accelerate your process to get you to a realization of transformation, but the transformation itself is kind of like a lifelong journey. There's no real end. Like I don't think that my transformation is nearly complete, but I have transformed so much. It's just an ongoing process forever, I guess.
Exactly. Yeah, it's like I was going like this, like peeling away at the layers, the next layer and the next layer and the deeper level of coming into what is your truth, your authenticity, your sovereign being in your life and your path. And yeah, this is something that's come up a lot as, especially again here in the Western world, as people read these stories or hear the Aubrey Marcus interview and they think, oh, magic bullet, this is going to make me, the MVP of the NFL if I just start drinking ayahuasca. But there's a truth to it, which is, yeah, I mean, I've had the profound miracles. I've had the moments where I'm like, okay, how does that feel like my anxiety is completely gone, or I healed something physical, then I've never had it come up again, or I have numerous stories like this. But then again, there's been a deep integration. There's been a lot of other somatic therapy and a lot of other work, daily meditation and embodiment practices. But what do you say to this kind of this growing popularity in people hearing about these medicines and then just kind of looking for, I always call it the Amazon Prime effect, where they just want to click and buy it and then have everything just change instantly. I mean, do you find that there's a lot of that mentality coming down to Peru of like, I heard this is a miracle and I just want my whole life to change in 1 week? And also, what do you say about this growing like, do you think it's positive that there's this growing interest in ayahuasca? Because of course there's a lot of criticism around maybe it's growing too fast, or maybe it's being over harvested, or it's not sustainable, or people are using it wrong. And now there's a lot of talks about this. Like, what are your views on these two effects, especially coming from the Westerners who are looking for these big experiences?
Right. Well, I mean, the recognition of that paradigm, I think, is at the core of a lot of the misunderstanding, because right off the bat, the way that our culture perceives medicine is substance based. It's material based. I mean, all of our paradigm could be considered a material paradigm in that we want the stuff, the spirit is a non-material entity, and therefore it doesn't have a place in the scientific paradigm or the modern paradigm, at least as it stands now. And the material paradigm is essentially like, I need to see it, I need to be able to measure it, I need a microscope on it or a test to find it. Like, there's got to be material. Whereas the ancestral paradigm is mostly non-material. It's like, actually all of that stuff is just an expression of the non-material. It's all energy, it's all spirit, it's all consciousness, all of these non-material elements. So for us, amazingly, consciousness is like often looked at as some activity of the brain, some chemical, combination, like it's some bizarre thing where we just can't like figure it out. And most of the time we're just like, whoa, whatever, let's just ignore that, and so when you're looking at medicine, the term medicine to us refers to the material, the substance, the stuff. What do you take? Is it a pill? Is it a drink? Whereas in the ancestral tradition, medicine is a process. It's a behavior. It's a ceremony. It's an act. It's a performance. And And so it's difficult for us to wrap our heads around that. And like you mentioned, like, well, why, there's so much research being done on MDMA and ketamine and even synthetic psilocybin, but they're just measuring the substance. Like, if I give this substance to you and then I measure your brain activity, or I measure, some of your vital signs or this or that, can I understand this substance? But ayahuasca is so much further than that, which I think is also part of the allure and part of the mystery and magic of it, is that ceremony is synonymous with ayahuasca. If you say, I drank ayahuasca last night, what you're really saying is, I went to a ceremony where drinking ayahuasca was part of this elaborate performance and celebration and process and, intricately ancestrally derived work that took hours and hours. And the drinking itself was just this tiny little piece of this elaborate process that was part of the tradition of healing. We don't have that. With ketamine, doesn't have a ceremony. MDMA doesn't have a ceremony. These substances don't have that process involved. And so, if someone's like, well, I want to have a transformation, I want to be the MVP, I want to have my life be like Will Smith's or whatever, then I just need to drink that stuff. And like, no, you don't understand, because your paradigm lacks the understanding of the non-material elements of healing. And so you think the substance just provides the outcome, the same way that if you take an aspirin, it chemically changes your brain chemistry so that you don't have a headache anymore. It doesn't work that way. This is a whole different paradigm. It's a whole different reality. It's a whole different world. So in terms of that understanding that you mentioned, like, it's obvious that there would be that lack of understanding, simply because we just don't recognize the non-material as the core of reality. And they do, like the ayahuasca culture, the culture within the paradigm within which it developed does. So that part is, I think, understandable, but at the same time, it's, I guess, problematic. And one of the things that I try to do so much is to have conversations with you to describe that, so that people that are interested in it can have a better understanding. And I've made a series of videos that try to talk about that, and written articles. Like, I do my best to try to like bridge the gap between those paradigms so that there is better understanding. But when it comes to the second part of your question about ayahuasca, I was very critical of people drinking ayahuasca and not doing it right, and having a like inaccurate understanding of it, or, not understanding what they were doing with it, just drinking it, not having ceremony, not having proper training, like all of those things. I was very, very critical. But over time, I think I took a few steps back, and I looked at the like big picture of it. And the big picture to me is that it's all better. And I think that yoga is probably a great example, because yoga has gone through like the entire globalization process already. Wherever you are right now listening to this, there's a yoga class going on, next door or something. Like, you don't have to go far to find one. And that is a really good thing. I think collectively, for the human race, the fact that yoga is a part of global culture now is a positive. It's a benefit to the human race that yoga has become so much a part of human culture, no matter where you are. Does that mean that every yoga class is being done correctly, or that every yoga teacher has good training or understanding? No way. I'm sure that for a person who understands the true depth of yoga, they probably would say, man, almost all of yoga around the world is this like watered down little shallow version that looks at it as if it's a system of postures that you get in, instead of understanding the true deep nature of its non-material roots and the non-material elements that are actually the core of understanding what yoga truly is. So I think there's a lot of similarities when you compare like the globalization of yoga to what's now could be called the globalization of ayahuasca. But in the end, even if you're doing it wrong, collectively, it's still a win. It's still positive, at least from my perspective, it is. And, honestly, like, I'm sure that if you looked up the statistics, there would be a significant number of injuries and hospitalizations due to yoga. Like, but there would be like people doing yoga wrong and having to go to the hospital or having an injury as a result of it and getting hurt by it. But no one is like, well, we should ban yoga, because of that. And nor do we try to ban bicycle riding or weightlifting or, whatever. Like, we take risks and there's potentials for injury. And so I don't want to like try to discredit people from using psychedelics improperly that might have some injury or hospitalization as a deterrent for the movement itself. So I guess in the end, like, I'm very, very happy to see that there is such an increase in awareness for ayahuasca and this like huge psychedelic movement to destigmatize it and to have more and more people experience it, because I do think that it's a real, real big win. And Chris Killam, who's a friend of mine, he was the only person I know of that did a study on the sustainability of ayahuasca, and he did not find that there was a danger to the sustainability. The reality is that there are people, like our center has planted over 1,000 ayahuasca vines. Most centers that I know of, like, you're kind of stupid if you're not planting as many vines as you can. Yeah. Like, and so there are ayahuasca farms now, and ayahuasca is a very expensive commodity. Like, if you can grow ayahuasca, you will make a lot of money growing it. By comparison, like, you could grow papayas and pineapples and yucca, and you could also grow at the same chakra, the same farm in the jungle, ayahuasca. And when the ayahuasca can be harvested, you will make 20 times, 50 times more money when you sell that ayahuasca than all of your pineapples and yucca. So it makes sense for everyone to be growing ayahuasca where we are. We grow ayahuasca. All the communities next door grow ayahuasca because they know that we will buy their ayahuasca. Like, it's so I don't know how worried I am about the sustainability of it. And honestly, I want to do everything I can to improve people's understanding of how best to use it, which I do feel I do. But at the same time, if there are casualties, or if there are, people that have unfortunate outcomes, I do accept that as a risk that people understand when they undertake it, just the same way that we do when we get on a bicycle and ride down the street.
Thank you so much for sharing this perspective. It's funny because I've gone back and forth on the same kind of like, yes, this is wonderful for everyone. And then like, no, oh my God, it's growing too fast. And there's people out there doing these, $10,000 ayahuasca retreats for entrepreneurs. And that just felt weird. But then I was like, but now people are asking me like, we want to go drink medicine with you. It's like, and so I've gone through all those emotions of like, who's to say what's right or wrong? It's like, I used to live in New York City and knew people who had gone to ceremonies inside of a loft space with music playing over a computer, and I was like, oh my God, blasphemy. But then again, who am I to say what's right or wrong, and to each their own, and there's always a path. And I do believe that on some level, all these paths are going to hopefully lead to similar places for most people. And so I'm glad you brought up that perspective, because that's kind of where I've come to, is that generally for the collective and what's happening on the planet, I do feel like, okay, there's a reason why this is growing. It's not just a coincidence that it's happening at this time in human history either. And I do believe that, maybe it's true, maybe it's not, that the medicine has its own agenda too. And I do also, I've heard about Chris's study, and, there's been a lot of back and forth, and it's kind of like you, the people I work with plant it and they grow it, and there's kind of a whole process of putting it back in the ground. I think there's a lot of concern about people going into the jungle and ripping it out by its roots and, that kind of thing. But I think that's where it becomes more about the education of who you decide to work with, and finding out, is this grown in a way that's where it's replanted, or are you just pillaging the jungle and tearing down, affecting the whole entire ecosystem of parts of the planet. But we'll see what happens. But there's definitely a lot of arguments around the sustainability. And then also, let's hear a little bit about your perspective, because again, I've had a very maybe somewhat unpopular perspective when I say things like, well, I do believe this is for the good of the whole. And there's been a lot of, pushback of like, well, this medicine is not for us because you're a white woman from the US and you're not an indigenous, you're not part of the indigenous tribe that originally worked with it 5,000 years ago. And it's not your medicine. I've heard everything. And I will say this right now. It's the minority. It's usually 1 out of every 3,000 or 4,000 people that say this to me. So it's like once, twice a year, I get some kind of person that says, this medicine should be free. And, who are you to talk about this because you're just some white girl? But what are your views on this when it comes to the acknowledgement of its roots, and how the Westerners, or, people like me, or, even people like you, it's like, white guy from Massachusetts. How do we come into terms and into right relationship with this medicine? And the fact that you've been living down there all this time, what are the viewpoints of the families and the people you work with? Because where I go, they tend to love it when we're there. Like they welcome us. It actually affected them greatly to not have us come and visit during the 2020 COVID, because then it affects their whole ecosystem there and their finances. And, but what are your views on this? Because I'm sure you've heard some of this over the years, right?
Oh my God, yeah. Well, there's a few things in what you just said. A couple of things that are different for sure. My first thing would be to like go back to the example that I gave of yoga. Like, is that person also against yoga? Is that person against meditation? Do they think that white people should not be meditating? Do they think that white people should not be doing yoga? Do they think that South American people, like, do they think indigenous people should not go to college or to get degrees and become medical doctors or play guitar? I don't know, like, I don't feel like we're doing that very much. I've never seen someone go to the Yawanawa who play guitar in their ayahuasca ceremonies now and say, hey, that's not your instrument. Yeah. That instrument was not invented by your people. So like, you should not be playing guitar, and take off your jeans, because those jeans are not from your culture. That, you're appropriating a westernized culture. Like, people don't do that. And I think it's pretty much accepted that yoga is pretty beneficial. A lot of the people that I know do practice yoga. I mean, just in general, like a lot of the people I know, and meditate as well. I'm a huge fan of meditation. I think meditation is fantastic, and I just don't think that it should have only been kept to people in Asia, and so I feel the same way about so many things. I do feel like we are a singular planet that is a singular organism, and that has a consciousness. And so, do I think that the heart should not share any information with the liver, and that the lungs should keep everything they know to themselves and not share it with the spleen, and our digestive system should not work with our circulatory system, and our respiratory system should never touch our central nervous system? Like, all of those ideas are ridiculous, right? Because we know that the interconnectivity is essential, and that we're all working together. All of us, the cells in my body, all 50 trillion of them, need to be in communication and collaboration and working in harmony with each other for my health to be what it is, to be optimal. And the earth as a living organism needs all of her cells to be collaborating and working together. So my view is that ayahuasca is a communication method for the earth to bring into alignment its cellular activity. And I do feel like it is a part of the earth's immune system, and plant medicine is what we see as an act an active movement of the Earth's immune system to bring back harmony for that organism of which we are like cells in the body of the Earth. So all of that to me like transcends the concepts that are honestly like racist. The idea that like a particular race owns the right to do something, and it and yet if they're the ones that are sharing it, like you said, like my teachers are honored to be able to share this with people all over the world. It brings them so much joy to know that the Shipibo traditions are being practiced all over the world and that they're understood and that people are singing Shipibo Ikaros all over the world now. They are so joyful. Like it brings them so much joy to know that no, their indigenous culture is not like less than. It is not inferior to the modern cultures. It's actually something that is in demand, that these cultures that clearly have this high technology above their own, but yet don't have this technology of spirit even close to what they have. And they're just truly couldn't be happier to be able to share that, and then to be able to have to make a living off of that, to make good money where they can know they can send their kids to school, for example, like to go to college, to travel around the world, like the things that we think that we would want them to do. And so to touch on that idea, like, oh, the medicine should be free, that to me is just absolutely ridiculous. It's kind of like saying, well, indigenous people should always be poor and they should never have enough money to do the things that I do. You know, I can fly over to another continent and visit another culture, but if you're an indigenous person, you should never make enough money to do that. So that's why everything that they have should be free. That's a absolutely ridiculous concept to me. But the fact of the matter is that
they forget that they have like bills and food and gas and houses. And I mean, I think there's a lot of misconception. A lot of these indigenous tribes are living freely off the land, and I'm like, no, actually, like they still are interwoven into a lot of modern cultures and systems, and there is still this thing called money that a lot of people depend on.
Right. Well, that's the point I wanted to make next, which is the true comparison. It'd be one thing if we were all living in the free world of the earth is not ours to own. That'd be great. Let's do that. But that's not where we are. That's not where we are. So like those indigenous people that you fantasize about living in the jungle where they just can freely roam, they cannot freely roam. Once they cross the border into that oil company's land that the government sold to them, by taking that land away from the indigenous people and not making it free anymore, but divvying it up and cutting up all of the Amazon rainforest into plots that can be sold to corporations, which is the reality, then you can't freely roam. You can't just go and do what you want or harvest something over there or hunt something over there. That's not a reality anymore because there is ownership. And there are corporations that are doing those things, not to mention that those corporations are polluting the environment or cutting down those trees or destroying the environment. And your option then becomes, well, if I want money, which I now have to have, then I need to work for those corporations. I need to cut those trees down. I need to work at that oil well. I need to work at that mine if I want to have money. Whereas having a tourism based on ecological preservation and cultural preservation, now it's like, wait a second, I can follow my ancestral traditions and still make money. In fact, I get paid to follow my ancestral traditions. Which would you prefer? That you indigenous people go and work for corporations where they destroy the environment, or where they get paid to preserve their cultural identity as well as preserve their environment? And it's a no-brainer. So, and the idea to criticize that is simply just ludicrous. but it's, I think, taken out of the context of the reality of the choice. It's taken out of the context of the reality of the situation. And most of the time, those people don't know the situation because they've never been to the Amazon. Mm-hmm. My first teacher, Don Juan, he didn't have a tourist center or a retreat center. He was just working for locals, and he didn't want his kids to be a curandero. He didn't want them to follow his path because it was like guaranteed poverty. But then when he and I teamed up together, and then we started our first little tour company called Ayahuasca Journeys in 2007, then he started making money. And people from all over the world started flying down to be with him, to meet him. So not only was there this financial element, but there was this huge respect element where all the people that you see on those television programs that make you dream that the world is better outside, now those are the people that are coming, and they want to learn what your dad knows. And so now his children started following that tradition. And so unfortunately, Don Juan passed away last year, but he has 2 kids that did learn from him over the past several years and are following in his footsteps to be that curandero. And that is definitely because there were people flying down to drink ayahuasca with him in ceremony, to receive treatment from him and paying for it. And if that wasn't the case, then there's no way you could convince me that his kids would have followed that tradition. They wouldn't have. And that would have been one more tradition disappeared, just like all of our ancestral traditions disappeared. So I think it is up to us as a human race to make sure that we preserve the still intact wisdom and traditions of the ancestral indigenous people. And that to me is what the ayahuasca tourism movement is about.
Thank you so much for sharing that perspective. I'm going to just send this interview to people from now on when people come in.
Yeah, right.
Because, I find it always very funny about, well, this medicine grows and it should just be free. And I'm like, have you ever either tried being involved in the ayahuasca making process or watched it being made? And it is no joke, the amount of human labor and like day in and day out labor that's involved. And they have this, grandiose idea that this medicine is just, should be picked and available. And I'm like, try making it. I mean, it's, there's people whose jobs, like it's at least, the place where I go, that's what they do. They make the medicine, and it's very physical, and it's a lot of labor, and it takes humans. It's not made by a machine. This is not automated. So,
well, to be fair, I do think it should be free.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
For the like people, I think it should be free for the patients. The patients that need it shouldn't pay for it. But the person who makes it and leads those ceremonies should get paid 10 times what they are paid now. Wow. But they should be paid by taxes. If we're going to have our taxes provide for us the way they're supposed to. Yeah. So like I'll pay taxes, and then that money can pay for all the people that need treatment so that they don't have to pay. And I honestly think that is supposed to be the way it is, and not that we should fund like our next war or something with the taxes. So yeah, let's make that the reality, and let's make ayahuasca ceremonies free. Yeah. But let's also make it so that the curanderos that provide that treatment get paid 10 times what they are.
Like any doctor. Or make it, because there's certain people like me, one of them, where usually I take my health to a completely different system. I don't know how long it's been since I've been to a real doctor. I turn to the earth medicines for healing. I know some people might criticize this, but it's my choice, and yeah, I still pay into the healthcare system, and I don't actually benefit from it really at all. And I agree, and I also agree with it's different if we were all in this together, and the whole, if the whole world saw money as different, maybe then it wouldn't be this issue where it is a choice to go work at the oil company instead of following my ancestry and keeping this tradition alive. But there is a reality. And I always say, look, like, one of my teachers many years ago said something about going to a Sundance with the Native Americans and said, donations of tobacco does not put fuel in their car. And people forget, these basic things that, there's things like cars and houses and food and groceries, and not everything is grown off the land and just picked, and we're living, there's very, very few humans that live like that anymore. It's just the truth of our modern society. But I have one last question for you that's also come up a lot. What are your views on people coming down there, having a big experience, and then saying, because I actually had someone say this to me once after one experience at a well-known retreat center in Costa Rica, who said, "This is my path. I am going to start pouring ayahuasca. And this person literally said, do you know of a training that I can do in like maybe a few weeks?" How do you feel about that? Because I know there's, and again, kind of each their own. There's lineages like mine where it's, someone who's been working with this medicine for 10, 15, 20 years, maybe then they're kind of ready. And then some people, maybe they dive in and a month later they're ready. What are your views on that? Like, do you believe that there's a certain level of training, or, like people who should and shouldn't, or like, the people that get this idea of like, I am meant to be a shaman, but then maybe they're really not? What are your views on this?
Oh man, I mean, I have an 8-week course. Our center offers an 8-week initiation course. We'll be offering our 50th course. Our 49th course ends on Saturday. I'm not sure when this goes live, but in October, our 50th course will take place. And I mean, I love that course. I'm so happy with what we're able to achieve in those 2 months. Of course, we're not saying that you're ready to pour medicine at the end of 2 months, but I do feel that we have the opportunity to present the principles of the tradition, so that you have the ability to practice. So you have right understanding and right technique. And those two things can go a real long way when you practice. Just like if you take guitar lessons with someone who's very, very good, and you take 2 months of guitar lessons and they teach you true music theory and also true technique. And at the end of 2 months, you know what you need to practice and you understand what music is. Now, does that mean that you're ready to get up on stage? No way. But does that mean that you will have the right tools to continue to get better and better? I think so. And then to me, guitar is a great example, because I know a kid named Nick Lewis, shout out to Nick Lewis, who came to our center when he was like 21 years old. And he was he is a phenomenal guitarist. And he was 21 years old. But I also know people who have been playing guitar for 30 years. And they are definitely not nearly as good as that kid, Nick Lewis. And so how is that possible? 30 years of experience. That kid started when he was 12. He's only got 9 years of experience. 30 is more than 3 times 9. But we know that's not how it works, especially with art, which healing is an art form. And I think that putting it into that context, I think, is probably the best way to be able to understand it. When you like art, when art moves you, when you want to have art in your life, you don't care how long that person's been painting, or how long that person's been studying their instrument, or how long that person's been dancing. It makes absolutely no difference to you. You just care about the art itself and what it does for you. And so can a person be a healer with a small amount of experience? Definitely. Can a person be not very good at healing with a lot of experience? I definitely have sat with a curandero who had decades of experience, who very quickly I was like, this person is, I'd rather drink with someone that has 1 year than this person with decades. So, and that person was indigenous. So like, just because you're indigenous or just because you have decades of experience, it doesn't really mean that much. Everyone is who they are. Now, those are specifics in general, which I think is the trouble, is that we're always like talking about it in general, like generally speaking. Yeah, of course, a person with more experience is the better person, right? Like that in general. Do you want to go to the mechanic who's been fixing cars for 30 years or the guy who's been fixing cars for 1 year? In general, you want to go to the one 30 years. But the reality of the specifics, does that mean he's going to fix your car? No, it doesn't. But in general, yeah, you know. So to be a healer in general, does it take years and years of experience? Definitely. But does that mean that the specifics of a person and their ability to heal you rely on the level of experience that they have? Mm-mm. So it is complicated, you know, and in the end, you just go with what feels right. Yeah. And sometimes that means that you work with someone because you have faith in them, you trust them, you like them, and you believe in them. And when that is the case, then their level of experience is insignificant to the connection and resonance that you feel with them.
Yeah. I love these perspectives so much. These are a lot of my same shared perspectives. And that's when I was really started changing this, like, oh, well, hey, if you really enjoy going to that ceremony in a, you know, loft space in Brooklyn that overlooks a sewage waste treatment plant, great, go for it if that works for you. And then you're right. You know, even with me, I've had some not so positive experiences over the years, making a decision based on someone who I really trusted saying, oh, this is the guy I work with. He's really great. I love him. You know, it's, hey, it's your path. Did not work for me. Did not vibe with me. Great. Learning experience. You know, as long as there's safety and, you know, you're not, hopefully no one's putting you in danger. And luckily, knock on wood, that hasn't happened to me. But yeah, I love these perspectives so much, Carlos. Thank you so much for coming on. This is exactly, you know, I think people need to take in these different perspectives because I think it really represents a lot in the world today of really having compassion and understanding for everybody in their own path and everybody, you know, really doing what's best for them and their soul, because there is no one way, right? Like, and in this day and age where people are fighting each other on social media over, you know, minor petty things where there's just general disagreements, you know, my personal approach is like, how can we actually just try to see it from all different perspectives and have different understandings and different levels of compassion. But we have to wrap up. So I want to give you a chance to have people learn a little bit more about the Ayahuasca Foundation, what you have going on, how they can visit. I want to bring you back to do a whole episode on all the research because that just like fascinates me, especially the little bit of research I have read out there. I'm like, wait, why isn't this making the international news? But it will, you know, more and more it will be. But yeah, let's hear a little bit about, you know, what you have going on and where people can find you.
Sure. I really appreciate it. I'd love to be on again to talk about that research, which was published in Frontiers in Psychiatry, and it is the most viewed article in all of Frontiers and Frontiers in website. So it is getting that press. It was picked up by Forbes, so there is like some attention given to it. But yeah, our website is ayahuascafoundation.org. We do offer a 4-week and an 8-week educational courses, and we also offer 10-day and 18-day healing retreats. Right now, we're fully booked until 2024, but there are probably going to be cancellations, and so if you sign up to the mailing list or if you use the contact form, that will go straight to me. And if you do have questions or concerns, I do plan to put out a new series of videos on YouTube. I was on my last 4-week empowerment course. I was facilitating that, and so I shot a bunch of videos to explain some of the other details beyond the ayahuasca that we take part in during those courses. But yeah, if you check that website out, it's got a lot of information, especially the article in the blog on retreat preparation, participation, and integration, which might be really helpful if you are planning to use ayahuasca in any capacity.
Beautiful. We'll make sure all these links are in all the show notes so people can access them. And actually, I'm going to pull up that article of the research as well, because I think this is the research people need to be reading. Carlos, thank you so much for joining us. And thank you so much for this beautiful work you do in the world. I hope to meet you down there in Iquitos one day. I keep saying next year's going to be the year I spend a few months in Peru. We'll see. It's usually more like a few weeks, but thank you so much. This medicine, I have such great reverence for it. It has been probably my biggest teacher in my life, and I thank it every single day, and I wouldn't be here without it. And I really feel like I owe pretty much everything to this beautiful sacred medicine. So thank you so much for this work, and thank you everybody who's holding this in high reverence and doing the often challenging work of sitting with ayahuasca. Thank you,
Thanks so
Carlos.
much. I know exactly what you mean. But yeah, thanks so much again for having me on the show. I hope we can have another conversation soon.